Welcome to This Week in Washington for June the 8th, 2012. This has been another one of those very frustrating weeks in Washington where we've had a number of different stories and discussions about the reauthorization bill. And quite frankly, I don't see how we have any time left to enact a reauthorization before Congress disappears for the summer. And on the other side of that issue, I really don't see how a one-year reauthorization really provides us the kind of stability that we need for our transit programs and our highway programs during this period. As a matter of fact, considering the financial situation relative to the trust fund is still unresolved, it doesn't seem to me that we have the wherewithal to even consider finishing this bill in a way that makes sense for anybody. That being said, there was additional discussions this week between Senator Boxer on the Senate side and communications with the House leadership about the reauthorization. Senator Boxer did put forward a series of proposals to the House that dealt only with the surface transportation portions of the bill, saying to the House members, could we at least agree on this, and then we could move on to the issues that we were very concerned with that aren't necessarily in the surface transportation area, like the pipeline, the drilling, and the coal ash, but I'm not exactly sure that we're going to see much progress on that. And then I'm also not very sure that even if they reached agreement on the surface transportation portions, the Senate would ever agree to some of these provisions being discussed about the Keystone Pipeline or about the coal ash or any of the drilling. So I'm still assuming that we're not going to be able to break out of this morass anytime in enough time to pass a one-year reauthorization. We also noticed this week that the House Appropriations Subcommittee dealing with transportation pushed out a transportation appropriations bill that raised another series of issues that we hadn't seen yet, one of them being the equity issue. And there was a fight over the formula about how much of the money that's in the trust fund would be returned to the individual states, pushing for a much higher rate of return than there is in SAFE-T. Additions to that for concern were an amendment that is still pending to be introduced that would force all spending to conform to the trust fund. So under these scenarios, some states could see a significant decrease based on the revenue that is available to us in the trust fund, and they could see an additional decrease based upon shifting around the percentages within the various formulas. That's up in the air, and unfortunately, I can't predict how that's going to come out. We've still maintained through this period that we need a stable playing field. We need more than the revenue that's in the trust fund. We're still making that case, but it's going to be very tricky to see how this happens, especially with the fact that according to my counting this morning, the House is only going to be in session 5 more days before it adjourns for a recess period up into and including the 4th of July, I believe. So, as I said, we don't know. On another subject of concern, we had a meeting this week with Marcia Simon, who handled much of the legislative work for us on Medicaid and the expansion of Medicaid that we were involved with on the Affordable Care Act. And I've been thinking a lot about that since Expo, since we all know that many people in our industry are completely overwhelmed by the dialysis transportation. One of the important things that we did in the Affordable Care Act was to create a class of service to people who were called dual eligibles, those who had higher incomes than currently to qualify for Medicaid. Their income was too high. Consequently, they couldn't get the Medicaid transportation benefit, but they did have Medicare. Many of the proposals that are included in the Affordable Care Act would close that gap and allow a significant number of current Medicare recipients to be eligible for Medicaid and to obtain the transportation benefit. This is very important to our longer-term strategy of finding ways to provide help for our members dealing with the situation created by dialysis. Unfortunately, if the court rules the bill unconstitutional, those provisions are going down, and we discussed that with Marcia when she was here. We also discussed separate legislation by the states that are trying to knock out specific portions of the Medicaid expansion in addition to the major issues in the Affordable Care piece, so we could face additional complications on that front as well. My guess is if the court declares that bill to be unconstitutional, and I think Marcia shares this with me, we are going to be back at square one in trying to find other ways to provide guarantees and financial resources to pay for these expanded needs in healthcare that I think we felt were pretty well along if we actually got the Affordable Care Plan to be implemented. So we'll have more on that in the next several weeks as the situation develops. So that you don't think that the entire week was filled with gloom and doom here, we also had the beginning this week of our first financial management oversight review by the Federal Transit Administration. Like all FTA contractors and subrecipients, we now qualify to be reviewed under the FMO procedure. So the next time any of our members raise with us, well, you know, we've had a lot of problems with the FMO, as I told Donald Browner earlier today, we can offer more than sympathy because we have our own experience as well. I've been especially kind to this group of FMO people that are here, especially since they come from a small firm of CPAs based in Philadelphia, and all of the people who are here are from Philadelphia. And as you know, as a native Pittsburgher, we don't usually think much of people from Philadelphia, but I've managed to control myself in my meetings so far and not allow the prejudices of Western Pennsylvania, where I was born and raised, to enter into our discussions with our new friends from Philadelphia. So far, they've been interviewing quite a few of us about internal procedures and processes, and I found it to be a very interesting kind of approach, and one that focuses on many of the areas that our certified public accountants do on a regular basis, and find their views of different small business issues to be quite interesting. So I'm actually looking forward to them finishing the first round of this review today, and then they're coming back to do some additional testing at the end of the month. I hope to report to you by then about this experience, and maybe many members of our staff were thinking about recording a couple podcasts, if we're successful in the outcome, of how we approach parts of this and how we organize for it, and maybe it might be a good learning experience for others. In addition to that, we did have one interesting thing this week. We had some visitors who were here filming a series of public service commercials on single occupancy vehicles and why they should not be used for commuters. Some of this came as a direct result of Karen's work with the Association for Commuter Transportation, and they came and filmed a commercial with Karen about it, and then they were nice enough to film one with me about why carpools, van pools, community and public transit are good alternatives to people commuting on one person in one car. I was lucky enough to have my commercial shot out in the hallway on our bench in front of our bus shelter, so it gave it a real, I thought, public transit flavor here indoors. And what was especially nice is that they used a well-known actress, who I must confess I didn't know, as the person who was interviewing us in this process. So when the commercials are out, I'll be sending them along so you can see Karen and I firsthand doing our public service announcements about why public and community transportation are important for everybody. So that's pretty much been our week so far. The day still isn't quite over. And we'll be in touch, and please let me know of any issues you want to call to our attention. And as soon as we know more about the Washington front, we'll be sending out some additional information, and please check our website for updates. Thanks, have a good weekend, and talk to you soon.